William, thanks for joining us here at Preaching Matters. You've just started a new section in the book of Acts. What's the section all about?
Well, it's interesting you want me to talk about the final section in Acts. I'm not sure I'm quite ready to do a kind of full Preaching Matters on the final section of Acts, if I ever will be. But what I have been noticing in Acts is something to do with the structure. And before we get on to talking about the final section, I think it might be quite helpful just to have a word or two about the overall structure. You will have heard me say on a number of occasions that I think the book separates out around the statements concerning the Word and the Church. Some of those section markers look a little bit untidy. I have become increasingly convinced that those what initially looked like untidy pieces at the end are crucial pieces, as Luke identifies for us something that needs to be straightened out, or that we need to be very clear on if the Word of God is going to advance, and that the Word of God will itself straighten out and sort through for us. So, for example, chapter 6 verses 1 to 7, well, the section could end at the end of chapter 5, but you've got chapter 6 verses 1 to 7 and the appointment of deacons in order to do kind of the administration of the widow's offerings. Now, that is absolutely crucial, that kind of division of labour, if the Word of God is to increase and multiply. At the end, chapter 9 up to verse is it 21, 31? Chapter 9 up to the section marker anyway, you've got details about the Apostle Paul and him being accepted by the Jerusalem church. Again, absolutely vital if we're going to have confidence in the ministry of Paul, who's going to go on to the Gentiles, that he was acceptable and accepted by the Jerusalem church. Chapter 12, after you have Cornelius converted, it looks like the gospel, there is the gospel to go to the nations. We're absolutely ready to take the gospel out. Why do we then have chapter 12 on Peter in prison and the beheading of James? Oh, as the gospel goes out to the ends of the earth, to the Gentiles, this gospel that is proclaimed by Peter and is going to be taken forward by Paul, we need to be clear that suffering is going to be very much part and parcel of taking the gospel forward, and the Lord is sovereign even in the suffering. Chapter 15, a vital section at the end of the first missionary journey, dealing with the issue of the place of the law, and should the Gentiles be circumcised or not? And absolutely key that gets sorted out. The Word sorts it out, and then we're able to go on to the next phase. And then at the end of the section, just before the final section, the end of section 4, at the end of chapter 18, beginning of chapter 19, you see just various aspects of untidy mess. Apollos not clear on the gospel. The 12 disciples of John the Baptist not actually converted, and the sons of Sceva with all this superstition knocking around. And there we see Luke showing us actually the gospel is going to straighten out and advance in the context of muddle and mess and theological dispute and so forth. So that's helped me, I think, to see that even more, with even more confidence, that the section markers really are the Word increased and multiplied.
Well done for dodging the question. What is the section actually about?
From the beginning of chapter 22, we have repeatedly Paul making a defence. So 22 verse 1, he makes a defence for the gospel in front of the Jewish crowd. 24 verse 10, he makes his defence before Felix. 25 verse 7, he's arguing in his defence. He makes his defence with Festus. He makes his defence with Agrippa. And so my suggestion is that certainly in the latter part of this section, Paul is making a defence for his gospel over against what is being shown to be unreasonable and theologically wrong Jewish opposition. And we're being shown that, yes, the gospel is defensible, in front of the Roman state, and defensible against the assaults, theological assaults from the Jews, because Paul is showing himself to be God's man doing God's work according to the scriptures, which is why the whole thing in Acts finishes with the Isaiah quote, "Therefore I'm going to the Gentiles." So it's a defense. Now that seems to me immensely important in the 21st century. Is Christianity defensible in the multicultural kind of global village? And I would have thought this is going to be very, very important indeed. It leaves, however, chapter 19, verse 21, where the final section kicks off, through to the end of chapter 20, where we've got this long description of Paul's ministry residential in Ephesus with the Ephesian elders. We've got the riot at Ephesus. And then we've got his ministry in Troas and his strengthening of the churches before he gets to Troas.
And why is chapter 20 there?
Yeah, brilliant. So chapter 19, the riot, sets up the issue, take it to court. But before we go to court, Paul goes to Jerusalem. Before we get there, we have this, pause button pressed, and Paul's ministry really, I think, summarized. So at the beginning of chapter 20, we see him travelling back, revisiting the churches, strengthening, encouraging. That has been so much of his ministry. Then he stops overnight in Troas. Now, the Troas visit is fascinating because it's on the first day of the week. It's clearly in the context of a kind of gathering and assembling of the people of God. They break bread twice. And there seems to be little indication they're doing anything other than eating. They do it twice. And so they eat together. And Paul teaches them. And in this overnight stopover with the people of God, he converses with them through the night. The word is actually dialogues. And he dialogues with them through the night. Gives us, some people say, oh, you can't actually work out what happened in the early church from Acts. Actually, chapter 20 gives us, I think, what Luke is doing is deliberately showing us and holding up as Exhibit A, here is the apostolic ministry positively. We're going to have the defense in court, but actually this is what apostolic ministry actually looked like in the local church as it conducted over a 3-year period on the stopover in Troas. Now, and he dialogued through the night.
How does the section start off?
Again, vital, Exhibit A in court. Here is authentic apostolic ministry. Now, over a 3-year period, this is residential, establishing the church. And we've talked about this on Preaching Matters, I think, a couple of years back. So worth, going back and having a look. But it seems to me this is what we should be holding up as if you like, the plumb line against which we measure gospel ministry. Clearly, it's a word ministry. He declared, he testified, he taught, he declared, runs all the way through. Clearly, Paul's life is consistent with the word he taught. So it's not just lip, it's lip and life. He didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. And we see Paul, he didn't ask for anybody's money and so forth. So you know how hard I worked amongst you. So you've got the life that matches the word. It's a word ministry. It's faithful. He taught them the whole counsel of God. We talked about that before. But notice just how very diverse his word ministry is, from house to house and in public. To the nations, to everybody, every group, and specifically to the Jews. So there's a great diversity to word ministry.
William, thanks for joining us here at Preaching Matters.